All women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric from a men's point of view and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public, because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children. Men will die for their wives and children. And God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts, the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. And the transcendentals, the good, true, and beautiful. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace. Women are wonderful. God bless America. Men are great. Feminismus delendus est. Fatherless Wound. How the Death of the Patriarch Breeds the Modern Pathology, written by Conrad Riker. Available now. Links in description. Fatherless Wound. A field guide for men who still notice reality. The Naked Empress and the Disposable ATM. Exposing the family court extortion racket, the 80% male suicide epidemic, and the Marxist delusion of equity, why the rise of toxic femininity proves the patriarchy is civilization's only cure. Look at your life. You were promised that if you worked hard, played by the rules, and offered your strength to society, you would be respected. Instead, you are tolerated, taxed, and told your very existence is a pathology. We must begin with grammar, the first weapon of the intellect. The word virtue descends from the Latin virtus, which translates simply to manliness or valor. It is not a neutral, sexless trait. It is the distinct telos of the male spirit. Yet the high priests of cultural Marxism have performed a linguistic bait and switch, rebranding your biological imperative to protect and provide as toxic masculinity, an oxymoron so profoundly stupid it refutes itself in the hearing. That which builds civilization cannot inherently destroy it. What they actually hate is the uninitiated trauma of boys raised without fathers, a wound they inflict, and then blame you for bleeding from. Consider the data that the Ministry of Truth refuses to publish. While the shrieking harpies of fourth-wave feminism bewail a non-existent wage gap, men account for nearly 80% of all suicides and 92% of workplace fatalities. You are not oppressed in the way these professional victims claim. You are the utility upon which the entire gynocentric machine runs. You are the beast of burden commodified into a faceless stat, expected to fund a welfare state that replaces you with a government check and a family court system that strips you of your children based on the mere whisper of an unsubstantiated accusation. This is not justice. It is a sacrilege against the natural law. It is the systematic slaughter of the male soul, performed with the cold efficiency of a bureaucratic abattoir while the media cheers on the slaughterhouse. I am writing this to snap you out of the hypnosis. In the following pages, we are going to apply the trivium to the lies you've been force-fed since birth. We will dissect the crucible of inconvenience to prove that true dedication is forged in the fire of friction, not in the tepid waters of female approval. We will examine the brotherhood of elevation, proving that competition is not malice, but the cooperative mechanism of mutual perfection, a concept the equity demagogues fear because they cannot survive the meritocratic flame. We will stare unflinchingly into the abyss of male disposability and pull our brothers back from the ledge, and finally, we will deconstruct the moralization of politics, exposing the left's project for what it is, envy. Weaponized against competence and double standards codified into law, you have two choices: continue apologizing for the strength you possess, or reclaim the logos that is your birthright. The emperors of Marxism and feminism are parading through the streets, buck naked in their decadence, demanding you applaud their imaginary garments. It is time to be the boy with the courage to point and laugh. It is time to stop asking for permission to be a man. The crucible of inconvenience, redefining dedication in a gynocentric age, In any moment of decision, the best thing you can do is the right thing. The next best thing is the wrong thing, and the worst thing you can do is nothing. Theodore Roosevelt squared his jaw at the canvas of existence and painted in bold strokes. But he understood something our carpet-bombed civilization has forgotten. The right thing is almost never the convenient thing. Yet here we sit, drowning in an ocean of ergonomic solutions, watching men drown in the shallows, while society hands them a participation trophy for treading water. I have watched good men, competent men, builders, thinkers, warriors turned into ghosts simply because they believed the grand lie that dedication should feel good. Let us drag this lie into the light and dissect it with the cold steel of reason. Consider the word dedication. The Latin root dedicare means to consecrate, to proclaim, to devote. Notice what is absent from this definition. Absent is any mention of feeling. Absent is any promise of comfort. Absent is any concession to convenience. The ancients understood what we have willfully forgotten. Dedication is a structural act of the will, an alignment with objective duty that persists precisely when the dedicated man would rather be anywhere else. The mason who lays the cornerstone in freezing rain does not pause to ask whether the stone shares his emotional state. He lays it because the arch demands it, because the design is true, because the cathedral will stand long after his frozen fingers have returned to dust. Now invert this. The modern gynocentric machinery demands that male dedication become a seamless, convenient performance tailored to female hypergamy and institutional comfort. You must be dedicated, but not so dedicated that you miss date night. You must provide, but not so effectively that you make your co-workers feel inadequate. You must protect, but only against the approved enemies, only using the approved language, only when the HR Commissar has signed Form 27B in triplicate. This is not dedication. This is domestication. The word inconvenience itself reveals the stakes, from the Latin in not plus convenire, to come together, to suit. Inconvenience is friction, the stubborn resistance of reality against our preferences. And what is modern feminism if not a crusade against friction? A multi-billion-dollar propaganda apparatus dedicated to the proposition that no woman should ever experience a moment's discomfort, no matter how trivial, no matter how self-inflicted. The university, the courtroom, the boardroom, the bedroom, all must be reorganized into padded cells where female feelings never encounter a sharp corner. Meanwhile, male suffering is not merely ignored, it is mocked. Men account for roughly 80% of all suicides, a statistic that would trigger congressional hearings and presidential addresses if the victims wore the approved genital configuration. Instead, we are treated to yet another TED Talk about the glacial pace at which women are achieving parity in executive positions, as if the gradual attainment of corner offices compares to the sudden self-inflicted death of thousands of men who discovered that a society which strips them of purpose will inevitably strip them of life. Observe the corporate plantation, that sterile wasteland of HR departments and DEI inquisitions that has replaced the mastery ladder of our forefathers. A young man enters the workforce today not as an apprentice seeking to learn a craft from a master, but as a servant seeking to avoid offending the sensitivity committee. He does not ascend by demonstrating inconvenient, grueling competence. He ascends by mastering the dark arts of allyship, a word that originally meant binding by treaty, now degraded into a loyalty oath to the matriarchy. He must signal his vulnerability, once considered a tactical weakness, now a mandatory performance. He must check his privilege, a metaphysical crime for which no evidence is required and no defense is permitted. The results are as predictable as they are catastrophic. Men check out. They refuse to build for a system that steals their birthright and calls the theft justice. The labor force participation rate among prime-age men has been declining for decades, and the usual suspects wring their hands and wonder why. I will tell you why. When effort is commodified for the collective rather than consecrated for the good, men withdraw their sacred labor. They do not go on strike with picket signs. They go on strike in their hearts, and no amount of sensitivity training will call them back. I think of a man I knew, let us call him Marcus, who spent 12 years mastering the craft of precision machining. 12 years of cutting metal to tolerances measured in 10,000ths of an inch. 12 years of learning the language of the lathe, the character of the mill, the temper of steel under pressure. He was, by any rational measure, a master craftsman. Then his company hired a new HR director, fresh from her master's program in organizational leadership, a degree whose very existence is an insult to the concept of leadership. Within 6 months, Marcus was passed over for a promotion in favor of a woman with 2 years of experience and the correct opinions about systemic oppression. When he asked why, he was told, without a trace of irony, that the company needed to diversify its leadership pipeline. He quit the next day. The company lost a master and gained a mediocrity, and the diversity report looked magnificent. This is not an anomaly, it is the system working exactly as designed. Now consider the theological dimension, which our secular age insists on ignoring even as it drowns in the consequences of that ignorance. In the grand tradition of Western Christendom, the ultimate archetype of masculine dedication is the willing sacrifice. The cross is the ultimate inconvenience, the creator of the universe voluntarily absorbing the full weight of human dysfunction, not because it feels good, but because it is good. To provide and to protect is to offer oneself as a bulwark against chaos. The father who works a job he hates to feed his children is not oppressed. He is engaged in the highest form of worship. The husband who remains faithful when temptation beckons is not repressed. He is keeping covenant with the eternal order. Modern secularism stripped the sacred from sacrifice and left only exploitation. Men are told to give their labor, their taxes, and their lives to a state and a culture that openly despises them while receiving no reverence in return. This is not sacrifice, it is enslavement, and any theology that cannot distinguish between the two is not worth the paper it is printed on. Social decay advances with the certainty of rust, forming on bare iron. Modernity has weaponized female hypergamy alongside unchecked emotional pathologies to rebuild civilization around evading discomfort. The government, acting as a substitute spouse with infinite funds and zero moral grounding, creates universal welfare programs that turn people into childish buyers. When a culture values avoiding minor offenses and bruised emotions over seeking objective truth, it commits a fundamental error. It denies reality altogether. We exist within a period of forced acedia, an old sin recognized as the noonday demon, representing a spiritual laziness that ignores the strict requirements of existence. The male obligation to tame the wild has been swapped for a female drive to hide the decomposition under the guise of progress. Yet the wild remains indifferent to such superficial coverings. The wilderness is enduring, ravenous, and perpetually prepared to take back what was never fully subdued. Let us dissect the phrase toxic masculinity, that poison chalice served daily at the banquet of cultural Marxism. Masculinity, teleologically defined, that is, defined by its natural end or purpose, is the protective, generative, and ordering force of civilization. It is the logos embodied, the principle that takes chaos and shapes it into cosmos. Toxicity is that which destroys by grammatical necessity, that which builds cannot inherently destroy. The phrase is an oxymoron, a contradiction in terms of verbal trick designed to enslave the minds of men who lack the philosophical training to see the trap. What the propagandists actually hate and what they are desperate to conceal is uninitiated masculine trauma, the shadow of boys raised without fathers. Boys who were never guided through the ordeal that transforms chaotic male potential into ordered masculine purpose. Of course, boys raised by single mothers in a culture that demonizes male authority will exhibit dysfunctional behavior. The marvel is not that some of them become feral. The marvel is that so many remain civilized at all. We reject their framing entirely. They pathologize male strength to neutralize their own terror of accountability, and we will not grant them the premise. The evidence surrounds us, overwhelming in its consistency, devastating in its implications. Family courts award custody to mothers in approximately 80% of cases, a statistical asymmetry that would be denounced as systemic oppression if the numbers were reversed. Paternity fraud, a gentle term for reproductive deception that would be called rape if the sexes were swapped, occurs at rates estimated between 1% and 10%, depending on the population studied. Yet mentioning this biological reality is treated as a hate crime. The Duluth model of domestic violence intervention, explicitly premised on feminist theory that assumes male perpetration and female victimization, has been empirically refuted by decades of research showing roughly symmetrical rates of intimate partner violence. Yet it remains the dominant framework in law enforcement training across the Western world. When ideology encounters evidence, ideology wins because the evidence cannot file a discrimination complaint, but the ideologues can. And so the lie persists, wrapped in the language of compassion, enforced by the machinery of the state. The red-pilled man must embrace the friction. This is not a suggestion, it is a survival imperative. To test a man's dedication, do not watch him in the sunlight surrounded by applause. Watch him when the weather is foul, when the creditors are calling, when the woman he sacrificed for has abandoned him for a more exciting model of degeneracy, and when the culture he built has declared him an enemy of progress. Watch him then. If he still works, still builds, still maintains the infrastructure of a civilization that despises him, then and only then have you witnessed dedication. We must rebuild private, masculine spaces, those civil society associations outside the purview of the maternal state, where men hold one another to the rigorous standard of the mastery ladder rather than the infantilizing standard of the sensitivity seminar. We must reclaim the inconvenient truth that the universe does not care about our feelings, only our competence. I recall the story of a tradesman in the north of England, a man who laid bricks for 30 years in weather that would send a modern office worker to therapy. When asked why he continued, he gave an answer that contained more philosophical depth than the entire output of the modern gender studies department, because the wall needs building. There it is, the wall needs building. The children need feeding. The civilization needs defending, not because it feels good. Often it feels terrible, but because it is good, objectively, eternally, immutably good. The transcendental good does not consult your emotional state before demanding your obedience. It simply demands, and the dedicated man simply complies, because he has aligned his will with something larger than his comfort. A century from now, when the ruins of our civilization are excavated by men who have rediscovered the ancient disciplines their ancestors abandoned, they will marvel at our folly. They will find the records of our HR departments, our diversity initiatives, our campus kangaroo courts, and they will shake their heads in disbelief. But they will also find evidence of the men who refused to bend the knee, the men who kept working when the world went mad, the men who remembered that dedication is not a feeling but a consecration, and that the crucible of inconvenience is the only furnace hot enough to burn away the dross of our age and reveal the gold beneath. Be one of those men. The alternative is to be remembered as someone who did nothing when everything was at stake. I watch men wake up to this systemic parasitism and rightfully withdraw their sacred labor, refusing to bleed for a gynocentric state that taxes their excellence to subsidize weakness. When a civilization rejects the logos of objective merit, it loses the capacity to generate greatness. It only possesses the power to steal it. To camouflage this naked theft, the cultural Marxists and their feminist patrons require a pseudo-moral smokescreen, because they possess neither the grit nor the genius to climb the mastery ladder. They must concoct a pseudo-philosophy to burn it down. The brotherhood of elevation, merit, competition, and the game of excellence. Equity is the battle cry of the envious, a doctrine so divorced from reality that it requires the violent suppression of excellence to exist. The word equity comes from the Latin equitas, meaning evenness or fairness, but the modern leftist has performed a semantic hijacking so audacious it would make Orwell weep. True justice, as the Western canon has always understood it, is sum cuique, to each man his proportional due based on merit. The Greeks called this distributive justice, the unequal distribution of honors to unequal merit. Aristotle himself wrote in the Nicomachean Ethics that treating unequals equally is the very definition of injustice. Yet the cultural Marxists have inverted this eternal wisdom. Their equity demands equal outcomes for unequal inputs. It is envy elevated to public policy. It is the weak demanding that the strong be crippled so the race ends in a tie. Consider the logical absurdity. Major premise: justice requires giving each person what they have earned. Minor premise: people possess unequal talents, exert unequal effort, and produce unequal results. Conclusion: equal outcomes are unjust. This syllogism is irrefutable, which is precisely why leftists cannot engage with it. They must redefine words, shift goalposts, and deploy thought-terminating cliches like systemic oppression to explain away every disparity that contradicts their egalitarian dogma. But disparity is not discrimination. Thomas Sowell demonstrated this exhaustively across decades of research. Group outcomes differ because groups behave differently, value different things, and make different trade-offs. The Chinese diaspora dominates Southeast Asian economies not through conspiracy, but through culture. Jews are overrepresented in Nobel Prizes, not through nepotism, but through a 3,000-year tradition of literacy and scholarship. Men dominate engineering not through patriarchy, but through an unrelenting biological drive to build, systematize, and master the physical world. The feminist response to these facts is telling. They cannot refute the data, so they attack the messenger. Their theory is unfalsifiable, which is the hallmark of pseudoscience. If women are underrepresented in STEM, it proves systemic sexism. If women are overrepresented in universities, as they now are, constituting roughly 60% of college enrollments, this proves women are superior, or perhaps the patriarchy harms men too, or some other post hoc rationalization. The theory predicts everything and explains nothing. It is intellectual flatulence dressed in academic robes. Now let us examine what competition actually means, etymologically and essentially. The word derives from the Latin competire, com meaning together, and pitire meaning to strive, to seek, to aim at. Competition literally means to strive together. The leftist lie equates competition with malicious destruction, with zero-sum brutality, with one man's victory requiring another man's annihilation. This is a fundamental category error. True competition is a cooperative mechanism of mutual elevation. When two men race, they push each other to times neither could achieve alone. When two lawyers argue before a court, they hone each other's reasoning until the truth emerges through dialectical friction. When two merchants vie for customers, they drive innovation and lower prices. Competition is the forge in which excellence is hammered into being. I experienced this directly as a young man in a boxing gym. The coach, a weathered old fighter with a crooked nose and calm hands, paired me with a man faster, stronger, and more skilled than I was. I took a beating those first weeks, but I adapted. I learned to slip punches, to counter, to breathe under pressure. My sparring partner did not diminish me. He revealed my weaknesses so I could eliminate them. This is the true nature of male competition. It is not cruelty. It is the highest form of respect, treating a man as though he is capable of greatness. The leftist cannot comprehend this because the leftist operates from a framework of fragility. To the fragile, any friction is violence. Any standard is oppression. Any failure is trauma. Which brings us to the shit test that notorious dynamic women employ to ascertain a man's fitness. The term is vulgar because the truth is vulgar. Women test men constantly, probing for weakness, measuring resolve, determining whether the man before them is a worthy vessel for their eggs and their future. This is not malice, it is evolutionary biology in action. The female of every species selects. She must select well, for her reproductive investment is enormous. A 9-month pregnancy followed by years of nursing and child rearing means her cost of choosing poorly is catastrophic. So she tests, she challenges, she creates friction. She competes in her way by forcing the man to prove he can withstand her chaos. But here is the civilizational dimension the red-pilled man must understand. The feminized state shit tests men in exactly the same way. The absurd speech codes, the DEI quotas, the kangaroo courts of Title IX, the family court systems that strip fathers of children and wealth on a woman's whim, these are macro shit tests. They exist to see if men will capitulate when a corporation fires a competent man because he refused to state his pronouns. The state learns that men are compliant. When a university suspends a male student on the uncorroborated accusation of a female student, the state learns that men lack the will to fight. When a husband apologizes to his wife for something he did not do simply to restore domestic peace, the wife learns correctly that her husband cannot stand against her chaos. He has failed the test. He has proven himself unworthy of her deepest respect. The correct response to a shit test, whether individual or institutional, is never capitulation. It is never rage. It is amused mastery. It is the calm, unyielding commitment to objective truth. No, I will not use your invented pronouns because language describes reality rather than your feelings. No, I will not apologize for my competence because excellence is not a sin. No, I will not lower the standards so you can feel included because inclusion without excellence is just mediocrity with better marketing. The man who holds the line passes the test. He earns respect, the only currency that matters in a world of men. Historically, male spheres were the forges where this accountability was shaped. The agora, the guild hall, the military tent, the locker room, these were not mere gathering places. They were thermodynamic engines of masculine excellence. Men insulted each other, tested each other's resolve, and pushed one another up the competence ladder. A young apprentice did not receive a trophy for showing up. He received the master's critical eye, the veteran worker's mockery, and the brutal, beautiful feedback of reality. Iron sharpened iron. This was not bullying, despite the pathetic framing of the therapeutic state. Bullying seeks to destroy. Male accountability seeks to elevate. The distinction is intent, and the distinction is everything. The feminization of male spaces has replaced accountability with therapy, standards with affirmation, and excellence with inclusion. Men no longer challenge their brothers, they coddle them. They sit in circles and share feelings. They validate each other's mediocrity. This is not love, it is betrayal. True brotherhood requires the courage to look a man in the eye and say, "You are failing and you are better than this." The true friend is not the one who comforts you in your weakness. It is the one who refuses to let you remain weak. The Greeks had a word for this, parrhesia, fearless speech, the courage to tell the truth even when it costs you. Every great civilization was built on parrhesia. Every fallen civilization abandoned it. Let us formalize this with the logical precision the subject demands. Major premise: human potential is actualized through measurement against an external, objective standard. Minor premise: a game is a structured set of rules designed to test and measure specific competencies. Conclusion: therefore, the rigorous enforcement of the rules of the game is the highest form of encouragement, as it provides the necessary friction for human actualization. To lower the basketball hoop so a short man can dunk is not compassion. It is the destruction of the very architecture of achievement. The dunk means nothing if the hoop is 8 feet. The diploma means nothing if the curriculum was gutted. The promotion means nothing if it was awarded for identity rather than merit. The word encourage itself reveals this truth. It comes from the old French encourager, and meaning to put in, and courage meaning heart, spirit. To encourage someone is not to offer them empty platitudes. It is to put courage into them. And how do you put courage into a man? By demanding he face what he fears. By holding the standard steady and telling him you can clear this height, not by lowering the bar and pretending he jumped higher than he did. The former builds a man, the latter builds a delusion. Consider the empirical evidence. Whenever groups of men are left to their own devices in an unregulated environment, military units under fire, emergency response teams in crisis, open source software communities building infrastructure, a spontaneous hierarchy emerges based entirely on competence, not identity, not credentials, not genitalia or melanin, competence. This is the natural law of subsidiarity in action. Leadership is an emergent property of demonstrated utility. The man who can read the map becomes the navigator. The man who can write clean code becomes the lead developer. The man who can keep his head under fire becomes the squad leader. This is not oppression, it is civilization. It is the only system that has ever worked. The Pentagon's own studies on unit cohesion confirm this. When researchers controlled for every variable, they found that the single greatest predictor of combat effectiveness was not racial diversity, not gender integration, not any of the fashionable metrics the left cherishes. It was competence and trust. Men follow men they trust. They trust men who demonstrate competence. Every other consideration is noise. The left's insistence on artificially imposing leaders based on demographic categories is a violation of the fundamental mechanics of reality. It is an attempt to repeal nature through legislation. And like every such attempt, it produces catastrophe. The family court system provides the most devastating illustration. In the United States, mothers receive sole custody in approximately 82% of cases where custody is disputed. This is not because fathers are unfit. Study after study demonstrates that children raised by involved fathers show superior outcomes across every metric: academic achievement, emotional stability, criminal behavior, substance abuse. The data is overwhelming. Yet, the feminized state presumes maternal fitness and treats fathers as optional accessories, walking wallets to be milked and discarded. This is not justice. It is gynocentrism weaponized through institutional power. The state has become the substitute husband, extracting resources from men at gunpoint and transferring them to women, while simultaneously stripping men of the authority that traditionally accompanied the provider role. You want to know why male suicide is 4 times higher than female? Look at the family court. Look at the men who worked themselves to death for families that were stolen from them. Look at the fathers who lost their children because a woman's tears outweigh a man's evidence in a courtroom that abandoned logos for pathos decades ago. The remedy is not resentment. It is not retreat. The remedy is the reassertion of the masculine principle in its full glory. The red-pilled man does not hate the weak. He refuses to lower the standard to accommodate them. He encourages others by embodying the standard himself. He acts as the patron of a new, parallel civilization. He builds guilds, mentors apprentices, and ruthlessly ejects the toxic, the lazy, and the disloyal. He understands that to let a man slide into mediocrity is an act of supreme cruelty. This is the brotherhood of elevation, not a fraternity of grievance, nursing wounds, and demanding restitution. A phalanx of excellence, demanding more from each other than the world believes possible. The West was built by such men who competed not to destroy each other, but to outdo each other in the pursuit of the good, the true, and the beautiful. Every cathedral was a competition. Every discovery was a race. Every treaty was a dialectic. And every one of these achievements required men to hold the line against the forces of entropy, mediocrity, and decay that perpetually threaten civilization. We face those same forces now, wearing the masks of equity and inclusion and social justice. Peel the masks away. Beneath them you will find envy, that most destructive of the deadly sins, systematized into an ideology. The only antidote is excellence, pursued relentlessly, enforced mercilessly, and celebrated unapologetically. Build your competence, raise your standard, find your brothers, and together rebuild the world the liars told you was impossible. I have shown you the master's forge where competition tempers steel, where standards actualize potential, where the rough dialectic of brotherhood hews men from the raw granite of boyhood. But you must understand what opposes this vision. The therapeutic gynocracy does not merely dislike masculine competence. It requires our destruction as a precondition for its continued parasitism. When I name male disposability, I am not trafficking in theoretical complaints. Let me show you the abattoir. Let me show you what this system does to a man who played by every rule, built everything he was told to build, and was rewarded with legal crucifixion. The disposable utility, male suicide, and the commodification of the masculine soul. Look at the man sitting in the sterile, fluorescent-lit courtroom. He has spent 20 years building a home, amassing capital, and fathering children. He has played by every rule the gynocentric regime handed him. Then, with a single sworn affidavit, devoid of a single shred of physical evidence, reliant entirely on the vague, unfalsifiable accusation of emotional abuse, his entire lineage is stolen. The state, acting as the enforcement arm of a weaponized feminine imperative, legally robs him of his property and forces him into the status of an indentured servant to his own destruction. This is the court-enforced fatherless wound. When a man looks into the abyss of a system that cheerfully atomizes his family and calls it liberation, he is staring directly into the demonic machinery of the modern pathology. The left celebrates this dispossession as female empowerment. Objective reality identifies it as a sacrilegious demolition of the foundational unit of civilization. We must define the terms of this slaughter, for the enemies of truth always begin by corrupting the language. Let us examine the etymology of suicide. It derives from the Latin sui, of oneself, and caere, to kill. It is self-murder. Yet to understand the mechanics of this tragedy, we must scrutinize the word commodify. It springs from commodus, meaning proper, suitable, or convenient. To commodify a human soul is to strip it of inherent, inviolable dignity and reduce it to a unit of pure utility. A man is no longer a father, a protector, or a bearer of the logos. He is a function. He is convenient so long as the direct deposits hit the checking account on the first of the month. The exact nanosecond his utility is exhausted or his assertiveness becomes inconvenient to the chaotic whims of his partner, he is discarded. The state and the modern woman have commodified the masculine soul, treating men not as ends in themselves but as disposable ATM machines to be chewed up and spit out the moment the pin is denied. The empirical reality of this commodification is a bloodbath, yet it is met with a deafening, sociopathic silence from the media and academia. Men account for nearly 80% of all suicides. Let that statistic reverberate in your skull. If any other demographic was self-terminating at 4 times the rate of the general population, the United Nations would declare a state of emergency, and every city street would be plastered with awareness ribbons. But because the victims are men, the architects and maintainers of reality, the silence is deafening. We are lied to by the therapeutic priesthood who frame this as a mental health crisis. It is nothing of the sort. It is a crisis of meaning, purpose, and belonging. It is the biological inevitability of a gynocentric culture that relentlessly drains men of their resources, strips them of their paternal authority, and discards them into the gutter of irrelevance when they cease to be profitable. When a man dares to express the agonizing despair of this institutional subjugation, the satanic hydra of the therapeutic state does not offer him justice. It offers him a pill and a diagnosis. The Marxist left has fully captured the caring professions. If he accepts his chemical castration and bows before the matriarchal throne, he is a good patient. If he resists, if he dares to express the righteous wrath of a dispossessed father, he is pathologized as toxic. This is a classic Kafka trap, a linguistic prison where the very act of defending oneself is entered into evidence of guilt. The medicalization of male suffering is a multi-billion-dollar industry designed to anesthetize the masculine spirit, turning lions into docile, medicated livestock who graze passively in the fields of their own ruin. Let us dissect this structural injustice with the cold, unyielding blade of the syllogism. Major premise: a just society protects the fundamental rights of all its members equally under natural law and due process. Minor premise: the modern family court system operating on the explicitly Marxist Duluth model, which assumes male guilt as a default ontological condition, systematically strips men of their property, their children, and their liberty based on unsubstantiated accusations. Conclusion: therefore, the family court system is structurally unjust and a primary engine of male despair. The logic is impenetrable. The state does not view men as citizens with unalienable rights. It views them as utility nodes to be harvested for the benefit of others. To reduce a father to a visitor in his own child's life, while forcing him to finance the household of the woman who betrayed him, is not justice, it is extortion dressed in a judge's robes. In the classical cosmological order, the masculine stands as the imago Dei, the logos incarnate. Man is the ordering principle, the one who looks into the void of chaos and speaks structure into existence. He is the priest, prophet, and king of his domain. To legally and culturally strip a man of his ability to provide, protect, and lead is not merely a policy dispute. It is a sacrilege against the natural law. It is the deliberate desecration of the masculine image. When a man feels he has no utility, he feels he has no being. The modern world has erected an idol to the autonomous, hypergamous female, and the blood sacrifice required to keep this false god fed is the redundant male. The solution is not to beg the feminine hydra for a table scrap of mercy. You do not negotiate with a meat grinder. Men must build alternative structures. We must construct shadow economies, private associations, and mutual defense networks that operate entirely outside the jurisdiction of the hostile state. We must treat male suicide not as a personal failing of the weak, but as a casualty in a cold civil war. It is time to pull our brothers from the trenches of this gynocentric nightmare, dust them off, and remind them of their birthright. We are the Logos embodied. We are the ones who order the chaos. We do not check out of existence. We conquer it. I have stood in the ideological trenches with you, staring into the abyss of a gynocentric society that legally strips men of their children and pathologizes their resulting despair as a toxic defect. Yet, to dismantle this Marxist slaughterhouse, we must stop merely mourning our martyred brothers and start dissecting the enemy's linguistic weapons. The left did not conquer our institutions through superior competence, empirical data, or rational dialectic. They simply weaponized female emotionalism to hijack the moral axis of the West. They feminized the public square, replacing the objective logos of our forefathers with the hysterical sentimentality of a petulant child, to shatter their cultural hegemony and begin our ascent back to the transcendent good. We must expose the dark magic of their rhetorical tricks. The moralization of politics, dismantling the satanic framing of critical justice. Let us begin by fixing our terms, for the corruption of language is always the vanguard of the collapse of reason. The word politics descends from the Greek politikos, meaning of, for, or relating to citizens, derived from polis, the city-state. True politics is the noble art of organizing the polis toward the common good through reason, dialectic, and natural law. Moralization, however, is an entirely different beast. It is the cheap, poison-laced weaponization of moral language to acquire unchecked political power. The modern left does not engage in debate, they engineer moral panic. By shrieking that their political opponents are not merely incorrect, but evil, they bypass the grueling demands of the dialectic entirely and proceed directly to coercion. This is the precise death of due process and the screaming birth of the witch hunt. If they can brand you as a demonic oppressor, they never have to refute your argument. It is a trick as old as the serpent in the garden, and we are long overdue to crush its head with the solid rock of objective truth. If you want to understand the rotting engine of leftist ideology, look directly past the pseudo-academic jargon of the university and stare into the abyss of the 7 deadly sins. These people are not launching a political movement. They are orchestrating a spiritual pathology and demanding state sponsorship for it. Envy drives the mob to tear down the competent and the successful, demanding equity because they lack the capacity for excellence. Pride drives the furious, biology-denying insistence that a man can become a woman by merely declaring it so, placing the ego above the laws of nature. Wrath fuels the purple-haired cancel culture mobs who destroy the livelihoods of honest men over a misplaced pronoun. A civilization that legalizes, subsidizes, and celebrates these vices is not progressing. It is apostatizing. It is a satanic inversion of the transcendentals, replacing the good with base appetite, the true with relativistic power grabs, and the beautiful with flagrant, degenerate ugliness. To take the red pill is to perform an exorcism on your own mind, to cast out these demons of modernity, and to refuse to worship at the altar of collective victimhood. Consider the torturous, illogical pretzels the feminist establishment requires you to swallow to sustain their double standard of agency. The left simultaneously demands we treat women as fully empowered, independent corporate overlords. Yet the very moment consequences arrive, these same women are suddenly recast as helpless infants, buffeted by the cruel winds of patriarchal oppression. Let us apply a rigid syllogism to this absurdity. Major premise: moral agency is the indispensable prerequisite for adult competence and authority. Minor premise: feminist dogma asserts that women lack the agency to consent after 2 glasses of wine, cannot be held accountable for their own reproductive choices, and require vast state protections to survive the systemic oppression of the workplace. Conclusion: therefore, by their own logic, women lack the adult competence to lead a Fortune 500 company or hold high political office. It is mathematically, logically irrefutable. You cannot have equal rights without exact equal accountability. If a man is to be held collectively guilty for the historical sins of his forefathers, then a woman must be held fully responsible for the choices she makes at the bar, in the bedroom, and in the divorce court. We will impose a single, unyielding standard of agency upon all adults and let the chips fall where they may. Watch closely how the feminist dialectic operates when it is cornered by empirical reality. It relies almost entirely on the Moat and Bailey fallacy, a cowardly linguistic bait and switch. When they are pushing for power, they advance the indefensible Bailey. All men are rapists, masculinity is inherently toxic, and the nuclear family must be dismantled. But the moment you attack their arguments with facts, they flee into the easily defended moat, sobbing, "We just want equal pay for equal work," or "We just believe in basic fairness." They use the language of fairness to smuggle in the poison of female supremacy and male disposability. We must stop letting them retreat, pin them to their true premises. When they wail about the wage gap, hit them with the cold hammer of data. Men work significantly more hours in higher paying, high fatality occupations, take fewer vacations, and prioritize income over work-life balance. When you control for occupation, hours worked, and experience, the wage gap vanishes entirely. Their rhetoric is a mathematical fraud, and it is time we treated the promulgation of such lies with the intellectual contempt they deserve. Let us now apply a formal reductio ad absurdum to the foundational dogma of critical justice theory, which insists that all statistical disparities between groups are absolute proof of systemic oppression. Major premise: any unequal outcome between demographic groups is irrefutable evidence of a structurally biased oppressive system. Minor premise: men are vastly underrepresented in higher education enrollment, make up 93% of all workplace fatalities, and account for nearly 4 out of every 5 successful suicides in the modern world. Conclusion: therefore, according to their own premise, our society must be structurally oppressive toward men. When you present this flawless logic to a feminist or a leftist, watch what happens. They will instantly reject the conclusion. They will splutter, move the goalposts, invoke toxic masculinity, and ultimately blame men for their own demographic despair. In doing so, they spectacularly detonate their own premise. They do not care about disparities, they care about weaponizing them against men. Their entire ideology is based on its own refutation. This entire moralization of politics is nothing less than a horizontal, earthly rebellion against the vertical, transcendent order of the universe. It is a Gnostic heresy that seeks to replace the logos, the objective, unyielding truth of reality, with the zeitgeist, the ever-shifting, emotional, subjective consensus of the mob. It replaces the divine with the bureaucratic state and virtue with mere compliance. The restoration of Western civilization demands the immediate re-establishment of the natural hierarchy, a hierarchy not based on skin color, genitalia, or victim status, but on raw competence, merit, and truth. It requires a return to the cardinal virtues, the fortitude to stand against the mob, the justice to reward men according to their actual labor, and the prudence to see through the seductive lies of Marxism. We must rebuild our institutions on the bedrock of natural law, due process, and subsidiarity, keeping the state out of the family and the family anchored in reality. Look at the pathetic parade around you. The emperors of Marxism, feminism, and cultural relativism march stark naked through the streets, their decadent flab on full display, commanding us to marvel at the invisible garments of equity and inclusion. The politicians clap, the media cheers, and the academics bow, all terrified of the shrieking mob. But you are the boy in the crowd, you are the one with the courage to point and laugh. You speak the truth, and the spell shatters. You look at the ruins of modern Babylon, and you do not weep. You see the foundation. You roll up your sleeves, pick up the stones of the Western canon, and get to work building a fortress of logic, steel, and virtue that will stand long after the rotting lies of the left have turned to dust. You stayed with me through the wreckage. You stared directly into the statistical abyss, where men comprise nearly 80% of suicides, where family courts operate as wealth extraction tribunals, and where a 10% non-paternity rate silently mocks the very concept of trust. And you did not flinch. That is the stoicism of the initiate. While the rest of the world scrambles to signal their obedience to the Church of Woke, terrified of being excommunicated by a blue-haired inquisitor, you just swallowed a truth bomb potent enough to sterilize a feminist sociology department. You finally see that toxic masculinity is a linguistic conjuring trick, a pathetic spell cast to shame you into subsidizing your own disposability. You realize that the modern gynocentric system views you not as a builder of civilization, but as a disposable utility node to be mined for taxes and discarded the moment you stop performing tricks for female approval. You have broken the conditioning. Consider the sheer mathematical absurdity of the left's final argument. They screech that all disparity is proof of oppression. Yet when men dominate the lethal professions, die earlier, and sweep the floors of the homeless shelters, the gynocentric zealots suddenly discover the magic of personal choice. This is the terminal contradiction of their cult. If equal outcomes are the measure of justice, then the near total absence of women in the sewer maintenance and logging industries is a crisis of female privilege. But they do not want equality. They want the ingenuity of the master without the calluses of the apprentice. We dismantle their framework with the blade of formal logic. We define terms, we expose the post hoc fallacies. We prove that liberation is not found in the therapeutic coddling of the maternal state, but in the ruthless, inconvenient pursuit of the good. You are now immune to their rhetorical sleight of hand. You see the shadows on the cave wall for what they are, projections of a dead ideology. Now you must act. You cannot unsee the rotting architecture of the feminine imperative. You cannot pretend you do not hear the desperate, silent screams of the men ground beneath the gynocratic wheel. You hold the architectural plans of the West in your DNA. Go forth and build. Build your competence until it becomes a weapon of mass reconstruction. Build brotherhoods based on merit, not feelings, and let the weak perish in their resentment. Stop apologizing for your nature. You are the rightful heir to the logos, the stabilizing force that tames the chaos of the abyss. Share this truth with a brother who is still sleepwalking through the ruins. Look the false prophets of equality in the eye, laugh in their faces, and claim your birthright. The patriarchy is not a problem to be solved. It is the salvation you are duty-bound to resurrect. And now the sponsored book introduction, Fatherless Wound: How the Death of the Patriarch Breeds the Modern Pathology. I remember standing in a courtroom that smelled of old wood and moral decay, watching a man I knew to be a good father, a provider, a protector. A man who had built something real with his hands and his will get systematically dismantled by a system engineered to do precisely that. His crime was believing that his labor, his sacrifice, and his presence in his children's lives constituted a right that could not be legislated away by strangers. I watched the gavel fall. I watched another piece of civilization turn to dust. That was the moment I understood that what we face is not a crisis of policy, but a crisis of ontology, a war against the nature of being itself, against the grammar of reality that has ordered human flourishing since our ancestors first stood upright and faced the horizon. This book is not for everyone. Let me state that with absolute clarity right now. If you believe masculinity is inherently toxic, that the traditional family is an oppressive institution requiring demolition, that gender is a fluid social construct rather than a biological and spiritual reality inscribed into creation itself, close these pages and walk away. There are thousands of publications that will flatter your assumptions and validate your ideology. Go read them. Find comfort in them. I have no quarrel with you, but you will find nothing here but provocation and fury. This work was not written for you, and you will serve neither yourself nor this text by continuing. I write for the man who has felt the cold steel of betrayal, the man who has been stripped of his assets by a gynocentric legal apparatus that treats fatherhood as a financial extraction point rather than a sacred office, the man who has watched his children weaponized against him, alienated from him, turned into instruments of his punishment by a system that profits from family destruction. The man who opens his eyes in the morning and recognizes with terrible clarity that the culture surrounding him regards his very existence as a problem to be solved. I write for you, and what follows may preserve your sanity and possibly your life. I do not offer that as hyperbole. I have watched men destroy themselves under the weight of what has been done to them. I have also watched men transform that same devastation into the foundation of genuine, incorruptible masculine power. The difference between those outcomes is not luck or temperament. It is knowledge. That knowledge sits in your hands. For years, I observed the wreckage accumulate. I watched competent, intelligent men reduced to visitors in their own homes, their wealth confiscated, their authority nullified, their children taught to fear and resent them by an ideological machine that has spent generations perfecting its techniques. I watched boys grow up without fathers and develop precisely the pathologies that developmental psychology predicts. Borderline traits, narcissistic defenses, chronic attachment dysfunction, a reflexive suspicion of authority that manifests as either mindless rebellion or mindless submission. Then I watched the architects of this devastation survey their handiwork and pronounce it liberation. The word pathology descends to us from the Greek pathos, suffering, and logos, reason or account. A pathology is an account of suffering, and the suffering engulfing the modern world is not accidental. It is manufactured. It is the predictable, mathematically certain consequence of a civilization that has systematically excised the father from the family and then professed astonishment at the psychological carnage left in his absence. Fatherless children suffer dramatically elevated rates of poverty, substance abuse, mental illness, criminality, academic failure, and suicidal ideation. These are not interpretations. They are empirical facts as solid as any the social sciences have produced. Yet the cultural narrative endures. The patriarchal family was a prison, its dissolution represents freedom, and masculinity must be reconstructed or dissolved before genuine human flourishing becomes possible. I intend to demonstrate, with the kind of precision that admits no honest refutation, that this narrative is not merely incorrect, but precisely inverted. The absence of the patriarch generates the pathology. His presence prevents it. The removal of masculine authority from the household, never its exercise, produces the chaos, anxiety, sexual confusion, purposeless violence, and spiritual starvation that define our age. What you hold is a comprehensive analysis of how we arrived at this catastrophe, and a concrete plan for surviving, transcending, and rebuilding what has been destroyed. I will walk you through the ontology of patriarchal order, not merely what it does, but what it is, and demonstrate why this order reflects natural law and the fundamental structure of reality. I will deconstruct the grammatical trickery that allows phrases like toxic masculinity to function as intellectual currency, exposing how language manipulation has served as the advance guard of ideological conquest. I will trace the exact mechanisms through which chaotic, fatherless environments permanently wire personality disorders into developing minds, drawing on evolutionary psychology, developmental neuroscience, and the accumulated wisdom of the Western philosophical tradition. You will discover how family courts operate as mechanisms of wealth transfer and father removal. You will understand how welfare systems have positioned the state as a surrogate husband and why the collapse of the pair bond follows with mathematical inevitability. You will learn the historical trajectory of the long march through the institutions, the deliberate targeting of the family as the primary obstacle to total ideological control, and the replacement of the logos with the lukewarm, void of postmodern meaninglessness. You will see with clarity that may disturb you why boys are failing by every measurable metric and why the culture that produces this failure calls it progress. But diagnosis without prescription is mere complaint. This book provides the remedy. I will guide you through the crucible of betrayal, because if you are reading this, you have likely passed through it or stand at its threshold, and demonstrate how to navigate the liminal descent that follows when every institution you trusted reveals itself as hostile. I will teach you how to integrate the masculine shadow, how to master the logical and rhetorical tools required to dismantle the ideological illusions surrounding you, and how to reclaim the 4 pillars of mature masculinity that have anchored genuine male authority for millennia. I will show you how to construct what I call a gynocentric proof household, a fortress of psychological and spiritual sanity in a society engineered for collapse. I have spent years immersed in the Western canon, the Greeks who first codified the relationship between reason and reality, the Romans who built legal systems on natural law, the Christian theologians who understood the family as an icon of cosmic order, the philosophers who recognized truth, goodness, and beauty as objective realities woven into existence itself. I have also watched these traditions be systematically disassembled by an ideology that denies biological fact, rejects transcendence, and seeks to replace the accumulated wisdom of millennia with the fleeting passions of the moment. This book emerged from that collision. It is written for men who carry the tension in their bones. Men who have been crushed by systems that despise them, but who refuse to surrender. Men who sense at a level they may not yet articulate, that they bear within them something sacred, something targeted for destruction precisely because of its power. If that describes you, what follows will equip you with the intellectual armament, the psychological architecture, and the spiritual foundation necessary to stand upright in a world that demands your knees. You will learn to name the demons afflicting you, not metaphorically, but with the precision that comes from understanding their historical origins, their philosophical premises, and their operational tactics. You will learn to defend your lineage, shield your children from the psychological mutilation, passing for education, and forge a mind capable of enduring the full assault of a civilization in terminal decline. The knowledge contained here is not academic abstraction. It is forged in real experience, my own, and that of hundreds of men I have known across decades. It has been tested in family courts, ideological battlegrounds, and the private desolation of men who lost everything and had to choose between capitulation and resurrection. The men who rose did not do so through positive thinking or emotional ventilation. They rose through the recovery of a tradition that predates all our current pathologies, a tradition that understands masculinity not as a social construct to be manipulated, but as a biological and spiritual reality demanding cultivation and transmission. I ask you to think, to follow arguments where they lead, to examine evidence with the clear rationality that is your inheritance as a man and your responsibility as a conscious being. If the arguments collapse under scrutiny, abandon them. If the evidence fails to support the conclusions, reject them. But if they hold, and they do, you will face a decision: continue participating in your own annihilation, or take up the mantle that has waited for you, since before your birth the patriarch is dead, they announce. The patriarch is obsolete. The patriarch is the source of all suffering. I tell you, the patriarch is not dead. He has been drugged, bound, and locked in the basement of a civilization terrified of what he represents. He is stirring. This book is the sound of that awakening. Fatherless Wound: How the Death of the Patriarch Breeds the Modern Pathology, written by Conrad Riker. Buy now, links in description.